All right, everybody, welcome to the 303 Endurance webinar series. Matt Fitzgerald is with us, and he is a renowned author, coach, and sports nutritionist with a passion for endurance sports. He has written numerous books on fitness, nutrition, and training, including bestsellers like Racing Weight, Brain Training for Runners, and How Bad Do You Want It? Plus, April and I have several of his books just laying around. With a background in competitive running and triathlon, Matt combines his personal experience with extensive research to provide valuable insights for athletes of all levels. He has contributed to various national publications and continues to design training plans for runners and triathletes. Matt's dedication to helping others achieve their athletic potential makes him a respected figure in the sports community. And speaking of athletes reaching their full potential, that is what we are getting into with today's discussion on his latest book, Chasing Mastery. Welcome, Matt.
Great to be here, Rich. Thank you.
We are excited to be. We're just completely fanboying on you here. Uh, I really want to get into start this conversation with the genesis of the book. You wrote in the book about how chasing mastery was actually an unplanned outcome of a different project that you were doing with one of my favorite people, Coach David
Yeah.
Ward.
Yep.
And you were actually creating a certification program to complement your coaching certification program. Just tell us, how did this lead to this book?
Yes. Yeah, the coaching certification that you mentioned was developed by myself and David Warden and Layla Porteous, another colleague at 80 and 20 Endurance. And yeah, we just wanted. It was actually in response to demand from athletes. Yeah, we had a particular methodology that we made available to athletes. It became very popular. A sub-segment of those athletes wanted to be coaches and would ask, like, can I get certified in this methodology? And the answer was no until it was yes. So yeah, in response to popular demand, we developed this coaching certification. It's like, internet-based, video-based type of thing. um, but there was actually a book, like a companion book that I wrote that went along with it. And then David's idea. So yeah, my fellow co-founder at 80/20 Endurance, David Warden, he thought, well, we should make like an athlete companion to this program. So really, just like a soup to nuts, like like being an endurance athlete 101. From our perspective, like we'd kind of nailed it for coaches, we felt. And so the idea was, and David looks at everything from like a business perspective. Like he co-authored a book with me, but he's not like a writer the way I am. So he's like, this would make sense for our business, like to have like an athlete companion. And I'm like, yeah, that actually does make sense. And I'm the writer in the family, so like I'll give it a shot. um, but like when I sat down to write it, as I say in the introduction to Chasing Mastery, like this came out, this other thing came out instead, and it was just like a function of like kind of where I was, myself like at this point, or at that point in my journey as like a lifelong athlete, a long time coach, a long time author. Like I felt I'm always drawn to the unmet needs, and I felt like this was addressing more of an unmet need.
Yeah. I have just a curiosity question. I love how many books you have cranked out over the years. I'm curious, like from start to finish, from concept to end
Huh.
state,
Yeah.
how long did it take you to write this? And what is your process?
Yeah, so for Chasing Mastery, there's it's actually hard. I'm not trying to like evade the question, but it actually is hard to just say, oh, 10 months, because very often there is just this prolonged gestational phase for an idea. Because I get lots of ideas, but it's a hell of a lot of work to write a book. So I can't just like, go off half cocked and start executing on an idea that hasn't kind of proven itself. So sometimes like I'll get a new idea and it will excite me, but it just like I know it would be premature to just start doing something with it. And so very often, and it's a lot of this is just instinctual. Sometimes you get an idea and you're very excited about it, and you're kind of like hot to trot. You want to do something with it, but you just know it's you just need to let the thing mature. So for chasing mastery, like I started. So I really only became kind of like a full-time coach in 2017. So only not even 8 years ago. And so like all my authorial and athletics experience predated that and then fed into the coaching. So I felt like I was a newbie. Like I hadn't been like I actually didn't I created a certification. I didn't have any. I'd written a bunch of books and done a bunch of races. And so for me, like I wanted to coach, but I wanted to coach well. And so I just did a lot of reflection on like what do I stand for as a coach? Like what am I trying to accomplish as a coach? And for me, what kept coming back to me, thank goodness there's a lot of coaches out there because there's a lot of different ways to do it. But for me, you know, being an athlete was the pursuit of mastery. I started running competitively when I was 11. By the time I was 14, I knew I wasn't going to the Olympics. Like I loved running. I was pretty good at it. But for me, like it didn't actually matter that I was only so good at it. Like I loved it enough that I wanted to see how good I could be. Uh, and so I didn't have the word for it at that time, but like what I was chasing was mastery, like not the Olympics, but like just getting to be as good at the sport as it was within my potential to be. And so that was the ride I was on, and it was extremely enriching for me. Like I love that I gave myself permission to go after it the way much more talented athletes do. And so when I got into coaching, that's really what I wanted to offer. Everyone decides how important this thing is for themselves, but like for me, I didn't want the athletes I work with, I don't want them to have any artificial or self-imposed barriers. So many athletes, they feel like they're just not deserving. Like the passion is there, the desire to see what they're capable of is there, but they're like, oh, well, I don't deserve this because I'm new or I'm not that young or, I'm I have the wrong body type or, whatever it is. Like all this stuff is artificial. And I'm just trying to like blast it out of the way and say like actually like anyone can have a ticket to this ride, like literally anyone.
Yeah. And willingness to take risks.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's excellent.
Oh,
Thanks for sharing that insight. I can only imagine how many drafts of of ideas and books you must have laying around.
Yes. Yeah. So that one, yeah, I really had to let that one sit for a while though. It's like I was intrigued by this concept of mastery, but like, yeah, to finish answering your question, like I would say like at least a year and a half passed before I felt like, oh, now I actually like I have. It's almost like you're a musical artist, and you need a hook. And like there's something that's like there's like something you want to express musically, but like you can't actually write the song until you have the hook. And that's a lot like that with books. Like sometimes I'll just like it's a title and just like a core concept or like a very skeletal structure, and then I'm like, okay, now I know what to do with this idea that's been like tickling at me for the longest. And so that's what happened with so many books. It happened with Chasing Mastery, like maybe like a year and a half of gestation, and then the actual composition. Because I'm an impatient person, and so like when the muse says it's go time, like I go, and then I can bang out a book in 9 months, which would be like writing a complete first draft. 70,000 words would be a typical length, and then like refining it maybe 3 or 4 times, and then handing it off to a publisher.
Cool. Awesome.
Well, Matt, I gotta say, I've read a lot of your books. This one shot very fast to my favorite that you've done, and I felt like you wrote this for me. I honestly have those I've had those limiting beliefs where I'm too poor. I didn't grow up with the greatest genetics, so on and so forth. You have so many things you can say that you don't have that hold you back. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that in the first couple pages, some of my favorite parts of this book are about self-regulation, and you have this
Mm-hmm.
really cool dichotomy, if you will, or like juxtaposition between Marcus and Bella,
Mm-hmm.
and how both of those athletes um, have this decision. They have a choice on how they're going to operate based
Yep.
on the cards they've been given. And both of them, I think you really uh, beautifully showed how you have that ability to lean into mastery, even if you don't have quote unquote the best
Mm-hmm.
talent or genetics or background. You have the choice to pursue something that is greater than yourself. And I love that. So I wanted to ask you, and you made the comment or the statement that athletes who have the greatest success are those who have the greatest self-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you talk a little bit more about what self-regulation is and why that is more important than quote unquote quality training?
Yes. So yeah, the way I look at it, what I lay out in this book is like a developmental model toward achieving mastery. And this is true in every sport and even beyond sports, right? Like you could be, a mathematician, and you went through a developmental process from the very first time you were presented with counting 1, 2, 3 to getting your PhD in some abstract field of mathematics. And so like every runner starts off at the beginning of a developmental process, right? And no matter how much quote unquote talent you have, you ain't done shit on day one, right? Like you can be so much better in 15 years if you go through this process. Um, so and so there are parts of it that you cannot control. That's the fun of sport, right? Like if everything was guaranteed, it would not be a sport. Like, when you go to Starbucks, you want a guarantee, right? You order something, you get what you get what you ordered. The fun of being an endurance athlete is that it's a high wire act, and you could fail, and in fact, you will fail. Like if that's not okay with you, there's Starbucks. um, so so like the but so like there are parts of every workout, every race, every step in the developmental process that are outside our control, beginning with the talent piece, right? But then there's a lot that's within our control. And you know if you have a bunch of 10-year-olds run a 1 mile race untrained, undeveloped, the kid who wins that race is very unlikely to win it again 15 years later. And this is an evidence-based statement, and it's not just in endurance sports, it's in all sports. It's like talent only gets you so far. It's what you do with your talent. um and self-regulation, like it's really just like that's really a term rooted in biology. Like self-regulation is what all living organisms do to achieve whatever their goals are. Food, procreation, like warmth, like all of that. Like self-regulating is just what we do. And there's a reason we use the expression "life is a marathon," because um, the endurance sports are really a microcosm of life. So it's not too surprising that self-regulation is actually the essence of what we're doing
Hmm.
as endurance athletes. And so it's just a matter of like you have a goal, and then there are certain things within your control. in pursuit of that goal. And self-regulation allows you to, one, set a good goal, because you can screw up goal setting. You know what I mean? So self-regulation allows you to set good goals, and then make a clear distinction between the things you do control and those you can't don't control, and those you do, and then controlling the things you do in ways that serve the pursuit of your goal. And that's where you get to the decision points in Marcus and Bella. Like, we don't think of it so much as athletes, but like, we are making decisions constantly, and there's no guarantee. We do not automatically make good decisions. And so, how you get to mastery is by like developing your capacity to self-regulate, which is really, it's like thoughts, emotions, and actions. Those are three things we have a high degree of control over. And like, you can't control like experiencing fear, but you can control what you do with the experience of fear. That's the self-regulation. And there's all these moments where you see athletes who have the same experience and they bifurcate. There's a certain control that is available to both athletes, but Marcus fails to exercise it and Bella does. And so you have athletes who start off at the same place. They have the same amount of potential, but only one of them gets there. And it's all about how they develop, and self-regulation is really the essence of that.
Yeah, I particularly like the emphasis on the decisions that we make, right? And we're making hundreds, maybe thousands of decisions a day. And there are so many facets in this sport of endurance, in endurance sports, training and racing and just taking care of yourself. There are so many opportunities to make mistakes and make bad decisions.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of he who makes the best decisions wins, almost.
Yeah.
Kind of to that, I mean, I concluded, in the opening chapters that part of self-regulation is just the role of the mind, right? The mind seems to have is the master switch in all of this. And you talk about the true limit of human endurance being psychological in nature, not physical. My question is, are there any exceptions to that, and maybe why or why not?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, I think what does make endurance sports kind of distinct, like as a family, is the kind of the different nature of what limits performance. The obvious contrast to make is with something like the shortest of sprints. So we can stick with like running, right? And like a 60-meter dash, you take like the fastest 60-meter runner in the world and ask like, well, why didn't you run faster? And the answer is like, well, I can only turn over my legs so fast, and I can only apply so much force to the ground. And yeah, there's definitely technique involved in sprinting. Oh yeah, I need to work on my starts or whatever. But for the most part, like, it's pretty obviously sprinters are directly encountering hard physiological limits to performance. Like, they're smack up against them. But like, if you extend, this is why I chose running. Like, if you take the sprint and you make it longer, so that it's no longer a sprint, the goal remains the same, right? You want to get to the finish line in the least time possible. But when you get to a certain distance or duration, you get to a point where shooting out of the blocks as fast as you can and keeping your foot fully pressed down in the accelerator for every step is actually not going to get you to the goal, because like your hard physical limits will like prevent you from doing that. So then pacing enters the equation. Well, now the game has changed, because now, like, the essence of like optimizing performance is psychological. Like you have to be. This is why horses can't run marathons without a human on their back, or like in greyhound racing, they need like a fake rabbit to chase. Like, they have no clue what a furlong is. Like, they can't they can't comprehend these abstract like distances like we humans can. So endurance racing is really like, it's psychological. I could interrupt you 21 miles into a marathon when like you're really suffering, but you're still on pace. You're not quite sure you can achieve your goal. But you're gonna try. But you're a little worried. In fact, you might be slowing down a little bit already. Like I could interrupt you there and say, "Hey, I'll give you $10 million if you speed up." And like, what are you gonna do? I mean, I know for sure, regardless of what you decide to do, you'll recognize, oh, I could speed up. Like I could definitely speed up. Like a second ago, I didn't think I could speed up, but you just offered me $10 million. And so like that just proves that like you are not face to face with a hard physiological limit. Like when you're in like the very depths of a limit testing endurance competition, like the limit is perceptual. It's so, I mean, I'm not saying that physical limits don't exist, but they're constraints. They're not the limits you directly encounter. So if I've forgotten the question, I get just on these rants.
No, I love that. I was thinking about the people that can hold their breath for 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, right? That can motivate themselves in a way or find the thing that can unlock their potential like that.
Well, there's so much data around people who, the concentration of finish times just before the top of the,
Yes.
3 hour mark and 4 hour mark of a marathon are highly concentrated, whereas afterwards they're not. And it's because of that discretionary effort that you can just somehow find,
Mm-hmm.
even though you're perceptually at the limit of your capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, if I pay you 1,000, if I give you $1 million, do you think you could pick up your pace in your upcoming marathon?
We'll see. What are you offering?
Love that. Well, Matt, I was just kind of looking at the different ways, and for the listener's sake, the ways that you broke down the portions of this book. They're in different sections. One of them is on motivation. And I really, really like this part of the book because I've heard this statement. I'm currently serving in the military, and it's always like motivation is fickle or it's fleeting. But you can find a lot of things to keep people plugged in, just like you said with offering $1 million for
Mhm.
someone to, yeah, right? So, um, in the book, you mention only the most motivated athletes ever find their perceptual limit, and I really love this statement. And going back to that comment about motivation is fleeting, it's almost shunned for seeking out motivation. Can you break down for us why motivation is important for peak performance and athletic potential?
Yes, yeah, that's kind of perfect because I did forget the question I was answering by Rich when I was talking about the nature of our limit being perceptual. Um, but you know, that's exactly why motivation. I mean, motivation is obviously important in every sport, but in endurance sports, it's uniquely
Mm,
important. Just because like perceptual limits are real. Like everyone has a limit to pain tolerance that is completely independent of like whatever damage like your body's actually suffering, and perceived effort and the constellation of discomforts we feel when we're really testing ourselves as athletes. Those are very real limits, but they are perceptual in nature. Like yeah, that was the question you asked, if there were any exceptions, Rich. Yes. Yep. I don't know, should I jump back and or
yeah,
just let
that's fine. I think that ties in with what we're talking about
yeah,
here.
it totally does. So, if Samuele Marcora was sitting here, he's the Italian born exercise physiologist who developed the psychobiological model of endurance. Like I've debated this with him. He's very generous with his time. And he says, he would say, no, there actually are no exceptions. Like he might give you one, which would be exertional heat illness, when, like, your brain actually overheats, and then, total system failure, and down you go. Like he would say that, like only episodes like that, like actual, like kind of health emergencies, would be the only exceptions. I think there are actually very, very rare other exceptions, like Safan Hassan collapsing at in the home stretch of the was it 10,000 meter final at the World Championships, was going like neck and neck, and just went down, just collapsed, and like everyone was obsessively looking over the tape, and it's like, oh, she got elbowed by the other person, or their heels clipped, but none of that actually happened. Like I just think like a Safan Hassan in those specific circumstances is actually able to run to the point. Because I mean, think about it. A 10,000 meter race ends in a 60-meter dash, right? So it actually becomes a sprint. So I think actually, now I'm sort of like changing my answer. Like that actually is the exception. The exception happens in every race you finish with a sprint, because like, which also reinforces the point that you're deliberately holding back so that you can still sprint the last 60 meters or whatever. So they're actually, well, it's no longer an endurance race, and you are directly encountering hard physical limits. And you can get, when you're pre-fatigued the way Safan Hassan was, and you are just like, I mean, talk about motivation. Like the motivation, I mean, she's the toughest athlete in the universe as far as I'm concerned. And just like it's the world championships, and there's a gold medal on the line, as motivated as you can possibly be, like if you have that like just sort of like a perfect storm of circumstances, you can get an athlete who actually, I just think there's like, the analogy I always make is like when you see a juggler, like a really good juggler who can juggle like 12 pins at the same time, they never just drop one. If they do drop one, they drop them all. Because it's so much about rhythm and coordination, and running is very much like that. Like running is controlled falling, and like you could like, if everything doesn't go perfectly, you actually will fall. So it actually doesn't take all that much. You just need something like a cog to just catch one among 50,000, and that's enough, because it all hangs together. And I think like that actually, I think it actually happened to Steve Prefontaine in the 1972 Olympics. Like if you watch that, it's a little debatable whether he just like decided he was cooked and he was in fourth place and he was out of a medal, if he just gave up. But it doesn't look like it. It actually, he looks like Kennedy being shot in the back of the head. No, it looks like just completely like violent and involuntarily, just like in horse racing, they call it tying up. So this brings it back to motivation. Okay, we're all over the place here, but I'm glad it was bugging me. It was bugging me that I forgot. And so those perceptual limits, so very, very rare exceptions. But those perceptual limits are real, but they are different than like your core body temperature getting to 106 and you just go down involuntarily. Those perceptual limits are mutable, and so like you think of it this way, like where you quit is here, and where your body could go is here. There's always a delta. Like we always quit with reserve capacity, like physical capacity. So what you're trying to do as an athlete seeking mastery is to just compress that distance, like to get the actual perceptual limit where you're like, I'm out, to get that as close as you can possibly get it to the
immutable.
And motivate. I mean, there's a lot of levers you can pull to compress that delta, but one of them is motivation. Just like the more it matters to you, we've all seen this, right? Like, just think of like 3 races you ran that were all of the same distance, and how you just freaking sent it in one of them, and then one of them you mailed it in. and then another one you were kind of in between. Like, what was the difference there? Very likely motivation. And so, like, for me, as an athlete, as a coach, like I say to endurance athletes, take motivation wherever you can get it. Like, because like there's no such thing as too much.
Going to shift us from motivation to lesson 5, where you talked about fear not. And you present that strong beliefs about understanding and managing our fears, how critical that is. How does fear hold us back, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think, fear is honestly, I think the number one thing that holds us back. I was going to say in life, but I'll stay in my lane. Like in endurance sports, because fear is protective, and for protective mechanisms to work, they have to be pretty sensitive, and they have to err on the side of overreactivity more than underreactivity. Like, like if you can't feel pain, you don't live very long. And like look at something like the immune system. Like, the long COVID that I've been carrying for 4.5 years is probably like an overreactive immune system. So like the immune system is really just like biological fear. It's your body being like, oh my God, we have been invaded by a threat, and now we need to just like make you vomit, give you diarrhea, bring your temperature up to 102 degrees. You know what I mean? Like, do all this stuff. Like, it's a reaction, and it feels pretty excessive, right? We have to remind ourselves it's actually not the virus doing all these things. It's our own bodies that are very afraid of the virus. So, just like, all right, that was a tortured analogy, but just getting back to like pure psychological fear in the endurance space, it's the same deal. Like, we're very much more prone to have too much fear than too little in life and in sport. So like, fear is necessary, fear is healthy, but you don't want any more. It's like weight on your bicycle. Like, you want enough so that it like functions the way it should, and you don't want any extra. Like, same thing with fear, just like the healthy necessary amount. But most of us athletes are walking around with more fear than is necessary, and it is holding us back. And that's an evidence-based statement as well. Like, if you look at like the relationship between performance anxiety and performance, it's actually kind of ironic. Fearing underperforming makes you underperform. So yeah, it's like, and this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. So I just spazzed and knocked over my microphone here.
Oh, no.
But all good.
Well, it's a particularly interesting subject for me too, because I feel like you almost can't master everything else unless you master your fears. Because I think if you don't master your fears, you start to do things like make decisions that sabotage yourself unintentionally, maybe
Yes.
even, so I'm really glad that this was a big part of this book, and that you called that out.
Yeah, same here. I wanted to add with that, Matt, that I've dealt with performance anxiety due to fear, and it absolutely, I've passed out because of
Yep.
fear having such a gripping, or allowing it to have
Yep.
a grip on me. So being able to give some real look at how to clear that away so it's not holding you back, I think that's absolutely mastering in lots of areas of your life. And that, when I talk about performance anxiety, I'm not talking about endurance sports. I'm talking about my Air Force career. That's where that showed up. And that, to me, I was just very much encouraged by that.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say, is like, this subject is near and dear to my heart because I've lived it. Like, I as I've written about extensively, including in this book. I my high school running career which started off very, very promising, was ruined, by fear for me. I underperformed. I lost the joy, and I quit because I was more afraid than was necessary, and more afraid than was healthy for me. So when I got back into running and into triathlon in my late 20s, like that was my mission, is to, like, I wanted two things. I wanted to reach my potential, but I understood, like, I'm not going to do that unless I get this monkey off my back. And like, I was just blown away. It took a long time, but like I was blown away by the metamorphosis that happened. Like I am now at the point where like I'm really just completely fearless as a racer, which is so far away. Like I ran, the longest race of my life last October with long COVID. I still wasn't even recovered from it. Like I kind of had no business there. I knew I was in for a world of hurt, and I absolutely got it. It was by far the hardest thing I've ever done, and that is saying something. But when I was standing on the starting line, like knowing, like this is definitely going to suck for 12 hours at least, and it's also very likely I will fail. And I will fail publicly. Like I had announced in the New York Times that I was doing this race. I had a video crew with me. I was going to write a book about it. And I had actually only been training for 9 weeks for 100 kilometers because I wasn't healthy enough to run before that. But when I was standing on the starting line, I was completely calm, completely fearless, just like free of anxiety or worry, and just eager, and kind of like in a grim kind of way, like, just like, all right, this is buckle up, soldier. But so like, I'm just a person, right, who puts his pants on one leg at a time, like everyone else. And like I never passed out before a race, but like I intentionally like hid in the woods and skipped the start of an important race in high school. I faked an injury in the middle of a race so I wouldn't have to finish it. So not that far, so I went from there, like here to here. Wow. And so like, if it's possible for me, it is for anyone. But it just has to be something you truly want for yourself.
Oof. Well said. I'm gonna jump into another question with you, Matt. And this is from lesson 16, Choose Your Adventure. You highlight the transition from passive to active participation, which is another big part of that choice, making those decisions to be an active participant in your life. It's also a big part of an athlete's training in that critical step towards mastery. So many athletes, especially newer ones, may struggle with confidence in making training decisions or fear getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What strategies do you use to help hesitant athletes step into decision-making role and trust their own judgment?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, the most powerful move you can make is to hire a coach, and not just a coach, but a good coach. Quite honestly, because it's there's a little bit like a tension between the idea that this is about self-regulation and taking ownership and taking control, and recognizing that ultimately it's all on you as an athlete, but you can't get to that place without help, because we're human. So I mean, like you look at like your favorite, most admired athlete, and you look at their journey, like how did they get there? If you ask them, they'll say, absolutely, I could not have gotten here by myself. And we think, oh, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, whoever, like, oh, they just like were born for it. Like, not according to them. And so I think you kind of have to do both things. You have to really accept the responsibility that's on you. Like no one other than you can get yourself to the mountaintop, and yet you still need a guide or more than one guide. And recognizing that is, I think, just helpful, because like the problem with lacking self-trust is, it was like me when I dreamed of writing books when I was a kid, and I tried, even when I was a kid, and I didn't. It was like, but the problem I encountered is like, you had to have a book to get a book. It's like, an agent didn't want to talk to you. It's like, well, what books you got? Well, that's the problem I'm trying to solve. Like, agent, I have no books. Like, how do I get to one if not having a book is disqualifying? So yeah, so it's like that self-trust can be very similar. Like, how do you get it if you don't have it? Well, how you get it is because most people who are low in self-trust, they are capable of trusting others. Maybe they're selective, and trust doesn't come easily, but that can be a way of bootstrapping. It's just like, you know what, like, I have no idea, but I do for whatever reason, I do trust you, and so if you're putting your trust as an athlete in the right coach, that coach wants to empower you to be self-trusting. So, like in that lesson in the book, I talk about how, as a coach, when I'm coaching an athlete who is earlier on in their development and feels like, please, coach, don't make me decide because like I have no clue. I'll just like give them choices, like a choose your own adventure story. It's like, all right, I've narrowed it down for you. Like, you can do A, B, or C tomorrow. Like, what do you think? And for me, I've already vetted these options. Like, I'm okay with all three, but it's like that's a powerful experience for an athlete. It's like, oh, wow. Like, they're not thinking about all the other options you took off the table. They're just feeling like, oh, you're giving me a choice. Like, you seem to trust me. Like, I don't trust myself, but this person I trusts me. And like, that's how you get the first book.
Love it.
Yeah.
Matt, April and I talk about the power of reframing often, and I was really pleased to see you raise it in your book as cognitive reframing. Talk to us about how this practice makes us more adaptable toward making progress toward mastery.
Yes. Yeah, it's the so I want to give a shout out to my mom, who actually was the first person who taught me this term. She was a social worker and then a marriage and family therapist, and would just like, she was passionate about her work and would share it with her kids. And so this was like this reframing technique, which has origins like in the early 60s and in like humanistic psychology. It's just based in the idea that none of us can, none of us can change the weather. I was going to say none of us can change reality. Obviously, we can to some degree, but for the most part, like, reality is reality. Like, reality is like the weather; it's fixed. But we have a lot of freedom to change our perspective on reality. And when you just look at people who are successful in coping, like in anything, honestly, it could be from endurance sports to how you cope after like a major natural disaster that hits your area. Like this, so the reality is reality, and the distinguisher is how people frame it, their perspective on it. And so like that is where you can really claim a great deal of freedom. And then the goal is, well, okay, if I can't change the reality, maybe it's like, I got an injury 6 weeks out from a race. Like, that's the reality. The question is now, then what? And one athlete could say like, the only luck I have is bad luck, and here it goes again. Like, just when I thought things were going my way, like, it's ruined. I can't possibly come back from this. Like, athletes do this, right? It's like, that's, the reality is that they have a hurt knee 6 weeks out from a race, and their attitude is catastrophe. And then you'll have other athletes like, oh man, this is a bummer, but actually I'm kind of glad this happened because I was about to get carried away with my training, and this is my body's way of reminding me that, like, pride comes before the fall. And if I made some mistakes that caused this thing to happen, but I don't have to make any more mistakes. And so this is actually, like, I kind of hate it, but this could actually be a blessing in disguise. And I'm actually excited to see, like, how I can. It's like, when you hit an errant tee shot in golf and you have to scramble. Like, some golfers love that. It's like, I've never practiced this shot before. It's like, how did my ball end up here? But they're like, time to improvise. So that's all reframing, right? Like, you get 10 athletes confronted with exactly 10 realities, and they have 10 different perspectives on it. And all you want is it's not a beauty contest. You just want to use the freedom you have to shift your perspective on an unchangeable reality to get the best possible outcome from it, right? It's like, you have a range of options. This one obviously is not helping you. Like, this one out here looks like, wow, like, you're actually less stressed out, even though things aren't going your way. And you're actually making better decisions and turning lemons into lemonade. Like, let's try to move in that direction. So yeah, that's what reframing is all about. And yeah, it's a super valuable tool for any athlete.
Yeah, amazing answer. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I think
I saw Paul nodding his head over
Yeah.
there, and Paul has a little bit of experience in psychology, I think.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
a marriage and family therapist as well. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah, great. Yeah, definitely great explanation.
Yeah, I was just gonna throw in there too that I obviously this is something that you have to practice. Like, the skill of reframing is not something that just comes naturally to someone unless you are superhuman, in my mind.
Right.
And there are definitely people who have a positive disposition, but I would say, like, the ability, and with psychology, that negativity bias being a part of our survival and
Yep.
preservation, right? So just to throw that out there too, I definitely think, like, this is something that athletes can build the skill of. You're not hardwired. You don't have to feel like this is impossible for you to be able to turn a lemon into a lemonade. It just takes that practice of, what is the gain we can get from this experience? How can I look at this from another angle that will serve me in this aspect, or maybe in the future? But I love that you share that, because I think, again, there's a lot of reverberations in this book that go beyond the scope of athlete. I think this is amazing to be a better human and to have
Mhm.
more joy in life too. So
Mhm.
I encourage readers, when you get the chance to read this, that you look at it from that lens too, because I think there's a lot of carryover.
Mhm.
I see enormous carryover, like
Yeah.
emotion regulation, and it's
Mhm.
and it's a great message, and yeah, definitely. Well, like you said before, you were going to stay in your lane, but it would be easy to go to another lane with this one. It seems like, yeah.
And Paul, by the way, if you have a question that you want to ask Matt, please go ahead. We're going to wrap up here in a minute. So April's got one more planned
Yeah.
question, but if you have one, please
Every time
please
I've had a
fire away.
question, it's ended up being answered, so
Oh,
I'm
wow.
good. So thank you.
That's great.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, this is my last question for you, Matt, and thank you for this amazing conversation. Endurance sports and life, we often celebrate pushing limits. It seems like we're always looking for the next thing, but how can embracing restraint become a superpower rather than a setback? How can bringing in a little bit of patience or steadiness, if you will, lead to a greater success and always pushing to the next thing?
Yeah. One of the things that I guess kind of surprised me most when, I grew up like a fan of endurance sports. I was a runner from age 11. I remember, grabbing hold of the Boston Globe newspaper every morning when Greg LeMond was racing the Tour de France, to, like, because it wasn't on TV. you just like see the results of yesterday's stage. And so like, this is me in 1986, just like Greg LeMond fan. And so like, like I was into these sports myself as an athlete. And then there was like, the people up on the mountaintop that seemed so remote. And I just kind of assumed like they're made out of space materials and they're not like me and I can't relate to them. But then I ended up, as like an endurance sports journalist, and like I get to know a lot of these people face to face, which was just cool. And but certain things were surprising. Like I would notice patterns. It's like, wow, like all these folks kind of have something in common. Like they're actually different from the rest of us in ways that were not what I was thinking. It's like they don't really seem superhuman at all. But one of the things I noticed that was surprising to me is like just the level of restraint, and just like the ability to self-inhibit when it was in their best interest. It just seemed like, people at my level and below would, like if the plan said run 20 miles, like we would run 20 miles, even if it was obvious by 8 miles that it was a terrible idea. I mean, it's like, well, but like it's the plan, and like if I don't finish the run, like I failed, and I won't achieve my goal, and perhaps even I suck at running, and I never should, like like
yeah,
like
that spin.
yeah. And when I spent the summer here in Flagstaff in 2013, like I never saw so many runners quit workouts like as the pros. Like the pros were bailing out left and right, and in every case, like I would ask, like, hey, like why'd you bail out? And they're like, I have a lingering sinus thing, and I feel like better to be 100% on Wednesday than to force it today. I'd be like, well, that is so rational, and like you are definitely not going to regret that decision. Like seriously, like if it were like like Spock, like just like no
Yes.
emotion, like just doing the rational thing. That's what I saw them doing. I mean, they have emotions, but they don't let their emotions force them to make like a bad decision when like living to fight another day, which is exercising restraint. So I think like there's so much like hype of like grit and resilience and toughness, and those things are important. That's why they're so hyped. But there's something else that is equally important, that is way underhyped, and that is, there are different words for it, but that ability to exercise restraint, to like to not do it when the Spock in you says it's not in your best interest to do it. Like if you can make that your differentiator, like you have a huge leg up on the people you're competing against.
It's fantastic. What a way to finish.
Yeah, anybody that brings up a Star Trek reference is a hero in my book. So yes.
That's true. You're a total Trekkie.
Love it.
Paul, any questions that you want to ask before we wrap?
I'm all set. Thanks, Rich. No, I'm all set.
Okay, wonderful. Matt, I got to tell you, when I'm really grateful for this relationship that we have, that we made a couple of years ago, a few years back. The chance that we get to speak with you about some of the amazing works that you have put out. I mean, I feel as an athlete, you have enriched my experience in this sport. I feel like I am a growth-minded person. I love to feed my mind with stuff that helps me in this sport, and you have given me plenty of food for my growth, and super grateful. I also think that our athletes and listeners that tune into this are going to be, I would imagine, very inspired to pre-order your book. It is going to be absolutely one of my must recommends to my athletes, and I'm looking forward to having at least one copy on my bookshelf over there, among this and all the others. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time with us.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Yeah, great questions.
Wonderful. All right, April, we could probably